all the international tensions, we're still working very well with the Russians on the International Space Station. I was on the team that went over in the 90s and negotiated with the Russians to build the ISS, so it makes me very, very proud. I know Sunny pretty well, and I know she actually liked being in space for a long period of time, but I know she's glad to be home.
You know, I read an article, Homer, that Sunny said she was having thoughts about trying to remember how to walk again and how that was going to work because she's been floating around for so long.
Well, that's true, and the big drawback, of course, of landing in the ocean is that bobbing that you saw at first. I used to be a scuba instructor, and I actually trained the astronauts to scuba dive, and we trained out in the Gulf. And bobbing around, especially after being up in space in a different type of microgravity up there, yeah, it's probably going to be a little hard for them to recover from that. But, you know, all astronauts are physically very healthy, and I think they're going to be just fine. But again, I'm so proud of SpaceX's Dragon. It is a remarkable machine, and I've even recommended that it ought to be the one that takes us on a circumflight around the moon.
There you go, making a recommendation. Scott, you know, the interesting point that Homer makes there about the Russians and the cosmonaut on board. You know, there was the cosmonaut Valery Polyakov, who has the record, 437 days in space, and he too, like you, didn't see a lot of health problems. They did a lot of tests on him, and he as the record holder at 437 days. But just in the political context, the geopolitical context of that Russian cosmonaut being in there for this historic moment as we're negotiating with Russia to stop fighting in Ukraine, it is quite a big picture.
You know, Brett, it's, you know, the reason we do that is for redundancy. So if the Russian Soyuz had an issue, they could still have cosmonauts on the space station. And part of the space station was built in Russia. Not the largest part, but part of it was. And it has some functions that are in the critical path to operating it safely. And that's a trade NASA made in the early days of the design, unfortunately, that you really can't operate it without that Russian hardware. Maybe you could do something to replace it, but it would take a long time, it would be really expensive, and the lifetime of the space station. Maybe it's just easier to fly the cosmonauts, but had it not been for that, I'm hopeful that that we would have made the decision not to cooperate with Russia, considering what they've done in Ukraine. So, you know, I think that was kind of a mistake to partner with someone that's not really a reliable international partner, does not behave in the way that you know, we should behave towards our neighbor. But I understand it. You know, we have astronauts flying with the Russians, and likewise they fly with us. But I don't think this is great example of international cooperation. I think it's more an issue that we don't have a choice.
Yeah, obviously there's a lot of competition with the Chinese as well and what they're doing in space. I want to go back to Jonathan Seri. We can see this rescue crew, and the guy was standing there on top of the capsule as you see the larger boat coming into frame there. Jonathan?
Yeah, Brett, the recovery team is working on the capsule, stabilizing it, and one of them was standing on top. You will often see this shortly after splashdown as the teams pass lines to each other to attach to the various points on the capsule. You were talking about the U.S.-Russian cooperation. Interesting you mentioned that. When I was a kid growing up in Florida, my parents drove me out to the causeway just outside of Cape Canaveral in 1975 to see the launch of the Apollo side of the Apollo-Soyuz mission, and that mission where you had Americans and Russians, then the Soviet Union, docking in space and having this cooperative mission. It really began this partnership between these two superpower rivals that amazingly continues to this day, even with all of the tensions. You talk to the astronauts and cosmonauts who have been aboard the International space station. They say they really don't discuss international or domestic politics, that they are all astronauts, cosmonauts, scientists, and they're in this extreme environment and they have to rely on each other, and they develop these friendships based on mutual trust and end up leaving as very close friends, actually feeling like family. So it's heartening to see that this partnership continues, Brett.
Dr. Harrison, it's interesting that we've seen this evolution of how space works for us in the U.S. and now becoming increasingly a commercial operation and even making the turn towards a commercial space station eventually.
Yeah, it's very exciting. It's a great time in history to be alive. The commercial era of space is going to open up access to space to a number of populations that traditionally haven't had access to space. It's a very selective process to become a NASA astronaut or an astronaut for any of the other professional government organizations around the world that NASA partners